There are 24 different factions in-game, each with their own mechanics and playstyles. Here's one tip for every single faction in the game to get you started in the campaign. Beastmen. Especially in the early game, you want to be constantly battling. Building up Bestial Rage will increase growth and replenishment, meaning you can get better units and keep them alive that much faster. It's free to recruit and maintain units, so battling constantly and replacing anything that dies is totally worth it if you can get to the highest level of Bestial Rage and keep that momentum into the mid and later game. All you have is fighting as the Beastmen, so do as much of it as possible. Obviously, don't get yourself out of the game, but if you can fight without totally crippling your army, then absolutely do it. BRETONNIA. Make sure you choose vows and troughs as soon as possible. Every single game I play with these guys, I always forget and have to spend several turns doing side quests I could have completed hours ago because I forgot about it. Pick whichever is the easiest for you to complete and keep them in the back of your mind to be completed as fast as possible. As much as side quests can suck, the bonuses that they bring for your lords are well worth it, especially when you need those late game units. Chaos Dwarfs. Min-max that economy. Labor is a resource that must be managed and sent where it is needed to keep your faction chugging along. Make sure your efficiency is as high as possible across all of your regions. Of course, prioritizing the most productive areas first. If you can get all areas to 100%, then do it by moving around labor when necessary. It may cost gold, seem like a waste of time and effort, but if you have all of your regions running at full tilt, the return on investment can be insane later on. Conversely, make sure any labor stuck in an area with low consumption are redistributed to be put to good use elsewhere. As long as all the numbers are as close to 100% as possible, you should have a great time. Demons of Chaos. Hey, want to hear an original joke? Here's a tip on how to play the Demons of Chaos. Don't! Really though. Even though he's a Demon of Chaos undivided, dedicating to a single branch early on can be totally viable to get ahead. Now, I'm not saying you have to build every single settlement to one god, but everything else aside from that you can focus on a single branch to unlock more and more powerful bonuses first. Which would you rather have, the basic units from all branches, or some of the most powerful from one, and then you can use these to unlock the most powerful from others? Choose well and you can snowball Daniel and your armies into an early game force to be reckoned with, that only gets stronger as the game goes on. Dark Elves. Dark Elves can recruit from both settlements and black arcs, but only one of these can move around the map wherever needed. Investing gold into black arcs and turning them into recruitment powerhouses is often a far better investment than settlements, since you'll be able to bring all those units wherever you need them on the map. Focus your settlements on as much income as possible, rush growth for arcs, and use them to get those late game units as fast as you can, alongside some battle support abilities here and there. Just make sure you let them use some of those late game units for themselves, as they can be easily taken out, taking all of your investment with them if you refuse to let them defend themselves. Fill them up alongside your main armies and keep them on the move to support from the coastline wherever possible. Dwarfs. One underrated strength of the Dwarfs is their resource buildings. They're the only faction in the game that can build to tier 4, resulting in a ton more tradable goods if you capitalize on everything you come across. Just a few of these buildings and some trade agreements with other order powerhouses can net you some serious cash, and that can come incredibly useful with their fairly expensive roster. This isn't even mentioning the other benefits of resource building, such as unit and recruitment buffs, as well as even more cash money. It's a minor mechanic, but it can net you some serious cash. If for some reason you don't build every single resource building you can, give them extra attention when playing as the Dwarves for some serious returns. Empire. Now I know that not all Empire Lords use the elect count system, but 2 out of 4 is still a majority that has these same mechanics, so that's what we're going with. In the current game there are a ton of threats to the various Empire factions in the elect count system. If you simply allow settlements to be raised, and even factions to be wiped out, you can capture and gift them back to their relevant count to gain massive fealty bonuses for very little effort on your part. Festus in particular normally raises most of Hochland and Midland, so keep your army nearby to push him back, not only to keep yourself safe, but also keep your fellow counts on side. Now yes, this will only work with counts being attacked, but you can still use the high fealty to farm authority and prestige to spend on getting the rest back in line. Grand CATHAY. The recent patch did bring one good thing to CATHAY. The new harmony system is now province-based and has rewards for disharmony rather than penalties. Early on, it's best to go hard into Yin for faster and cheaper growth before switching over to Yang later for research and recruitment. You can switch Yin and Yang buildings at any time by simply hovering over them and choosing the opposite building, so make sure you're checking on provinces later in the game to make sure they're as optimized as possible. It's boring percentage-based bonuses, but they add up fast if you're doing lots of recruitment or just want to blaze through the tech tree. Greenskins. During a war, you gain the bonuses on every army no matter who they're fighting, so a good strategy is to pick an easy tank you know you can take and then reap the benefits to help you elsewhere. The only thing that changes depending on your target is the trophy upon your success. Now yeah, weaker factions means a worse trophy, but they're not overly impactful, so don't worry too much about it, especially early on. I'd much rather have a successful war and bonus reputation to take into the next one. Target that minor faction you could easily take out anyway, and use the extra army power to take the fight to a much tougher enemy that you might not be able to take out at the same time limit. Bonus tip, make sure armies are as full as possible before starting a war. The max size of a war army is based on the size of the parent army when the war is called. Building the army up later on won't get you anything extra, so make sure you fill up to the max before you get going. High Elves. The actual mechanics surrounding influence might be a little lackluster, but the lords and heroes you can recruit by spending a little are quite the opposite. You want to farm this stuff as much as possible, spend it on characters to add to your faction for both Lords, Battle, and Campaign heroes. Going with the options that cost no influence will leave you with negative effects for the character in a variety of ways. Inversely, spending increasing amounts of influence will let you pick up characters with a variety of increasingly powerful bonuses, making them far better at their jobs. Some bonuses are simple stat buffs, but others can have some serious effects on income, army stats, and much more. The bottom line is, farm this stuff as much as possible, ignore the relation manipulation since it hardly ever does anything useful, get tons of outposts for even more influence, and staff your faction with the best possible leaders you can get your hands on. KHORNE. I mean, do I really need to say more than skulls for the skull throne? It really is the entire gimmick. If you keep adding skulls to the throne whenever you can, you'll get tons of bonuses onto your army and faction, with the most powerful of course being more movement range after raising and a bunch more post-battle loot. This of course for every army in your faction, so put skulls onto the chair whenever you can, especially before large conquests, get a tide of powerful bonuses at your back. It's one of those things that seems obvious, but I know I forget to activate this, thinking I should save it for later, and before you know it, I'm at the final boss with 700 green herbs that I should have used to make my life so much easier. KISLEV. When playing as KISLEV, the best lords and to be honest heroes are the witches from the Ice Court, but they require training before you can deploy them onto the campaign map. This is just fine, but the problem is training takes quite a few turns to complete, so if you need one immediately and you haven't been training in the background, you're going to be waiting a while before you can have one at your disposal. My best advice is to always have at least one of each lord and hero in reserve. It doesn't matter your chosen lore or even what you're going to use them for in the case of heroes, just that you have one in reserve, so if you suddenly need an extra army or hero, you have them without waiting for all their training. Sure, it costs gold to get them trained, but once it's paid for, they have no recruitment costs and no upkeep until they're active, so it's one-time payment for a lot of peace of mind. Side note, take extra special care not to let these guys die, as all that training going down the drain because they die in 3 turns will bring you to tears if you aren't careful. Lizardmen. Honestly, the basic Lizardmen like Mazdamundi and Krotka need a bit of rework since their only real mechanic is the geomantic web, and it's wacky as shit. That being said, if you lay the foundations for it early on, you can reap some serious benefits when it eventually comes online. Yes, I know it's just commandment buffs, but getting them to the max level can earn you some serious buffs to your regions. If you get something like 25% extra income in your richest provinces, or 25% less recruitment cost in one of your recruitment provinces, that's a pretty serious bonus. Now, is it time consuming, expensive, and basically worthless until it finally comes online in the late game? Absolutely. But you should still invest if you have the gold to spare, since getting it working for you sooner rather than later will give you a tasty power spike a lot sooner. NORSCA. When playing as NORSCA, you can dedicate each settlement you raise to one of their 4 deities, and the more you do this, the more powerful bonuses you unlock for your faction. Upon reaching max dedication with one, all of the others are locked out from progressing any further, but the bonuses unlocked so far will remain. So, it's totally fine to focus on a single deity if you want their powers first, but stop before you get to 100 and bring the others up to unlock any of their extra effects that you want. I don't know about you, but I want replenishment, less upkeep, extra weapon strength, and wins and battery reserve all at the same time, rather than having to pick just one. Now yeah, you're delaying getting the max effects of your chosen deity, but in the long run all the extras will give you a ton more help. And yes, reducing the others every time you increase one does mean this is going to take you a fairly long time to get all of them up to at least the 2nd tier. But hey, it gives you more reasons to keep playing, and who doesn't love side quests? NURGLE. With the exception of research, the only way to unlock new plague symptoms is to spread plagues as much as possible. So, you want to follow ABC. Always be coughing to spread plagues to everything you go near. Placing them on your armies is great to move them around wherever you go to, but settlements work too, especially if you can get the effects beneficial to each. As long as you always have a plague or 2 in the go and they're spreading, you'll be progressing the mechanic to unlock more powerful effects to give you more and more advantages in both campaign and battle. Remember to switch it up and use different kinds of plagues to spread them all and collect as many symptoms as possible. Pop them just as you're about to move into high traffic areas, just do everything you can to spread them far and wide constantly. Don't let those infections sit unused. Make like me on a Sunday night and spread it. It being the word of our Lord in my case. Get your mind out of the Guna. I mean, gotta. Ogre Kingdoms. Now this one might upset you Okois in the audience, but unironically, who is actually playing the Ogres, because they are pretty sucky. Anyway, if you somehow find yourself in one of their campaigns, something that I know I forget to use is the sacrifices to the Great Mussy from the meat mechanic. You want to be tossing your meat into that gaper at all times like I wish Isabella would do to me on a Sunday. After church, of course. And I'm talking about dinner, obviously. You guys are gross. As long as you're in your own lands, the upkeep from meat is fairly minimal, so you should have no problem spending 10 every 10 turns in exchange for all kinds of army buffs. Bloody and Raw is probably the best, both for certain post-dinner Isabella activities and also in-game, but the others have their niche uses too. As long as you have one of them going at all times, your armies will be making use of buffs they wouldn't otherwise have. It's nothing game-changing, but it's better to have them than not. SKAVEN. I mean, SKAVEN are so OP in their base form that as long as you're playing them, you're probably having a pretty easy time of it. If there was one thing I would say to focus on, it would be food. Now yes, this is super boring, but if you let it get out of hand and into the lower levels, it can bring your campaign to a grinding halt. Even being at 40% capacity, it brings a tide of debuffs that are going to make your game so much harder than it needs to be, and don't even think about letting it get all the way down to 20%. If you're in the yellow, you should be focusing on collecting more food whenever possible, whether that's buildings, commandments, armies, whatever it takes, just fill your food to the max whenever you can. Also, certain buildings can increase capacity, and since the bar is based on a percentage of max, this can drop your percentage sometimes significantly. So keep an eye out for this, as it can quickly catch you out if you aren't careful. The bottom line is, keep it topped up at all times and never let yourself fall to the lower levels, as you will surely regret it. SLAANESH. Honestly, SLAANESH for me is one of the hardest factions to make use of their mechanics, since it requires you to play it in a very specific way to even have a chance of seeing half of what they can do. Instead of the traditional conquest, you're instead encouraged to increase your seductive influence over factions and eventually force them into becoming your vassals. Why you would do this instead of just invading their lands, which is simpler, gets you more resources, and doesn't require a whole lot of fighting around outside of RP, is beyond me, but it is what it is. One way to increase influence, which I find flies under the radar, is the gifts of SLAANESH. These are imparted on any lord who either loses a battle to you, or is a target of a successful hero action, which is much more easy to do. Not only do these grant you more devotees and influence over the lord's faction, but you're also gaining bonuses to seduction and corruption wherever they go. If you spam heroes and perform actions on every lord you see until everyone is gifted, you'll be gaining a staggering amount of devotees to spend on cults and other mechanics, the world will flood with your corruption, and you'll eventually have your choice of who to vassalize. So use the starting hero, recruit a few more as soon as you can, and get them performing actions on whoever they see. Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings have a number of mechanics like crafting in the Books of Nagash and more, but my favourite has always been their upkeep free armies. Now yes, they have limits elsewhere, but for basic units like frontline skeletons, they're totally free, so early on, why not just fill up armies with basic units to give yourself a numbers advantage before you can afford anything better. Every time you get a new army, just fill it up with whatever you can, even if it's pure skeleton spam. They're totally free, so there is quite literally no harm. Yes, they're crap units, but before you get anything better, you might as well use them. Just disband them later and you'll have lost precisely nothing in the process. Building up armor should be done in every campaign, but for this one in particular, you really might as well go whole hog and fill them up to the brim. TZEENTCH. Now we have two lords for TZEENTCH and they don't share all their mechanics, so this one gets a little harder to advise on, but I think I have just the ticket. So no doubt you're familiar with the teleportation movement stance. It's basically the underways that consumes magic reserves to use with no chance of interception. Now right out of the gate, this is 40 Winds of Magic a ticket, which isn't exactly free. That's 2 Infernal Gateways and almost a ping fire of TZEENTCH. And when you don't have the winds to move around and fill up your bag quickly, you don't want to go running dry. And that's why I would advise you to use the channeling movement stance basically all the time unless you really need the extra 10% range. An extra 15 per turn is enough to counter either the lowest level of Winds of Magic possible, and when added to the max, it's going to be a hell of a lot of winds heading to your reserves all at once. You can pay for teleport with 3 turns in this stance when winds are blown, and even if you aren't teleporting, more winds means more spells and also more movement range and barrier replenishment, so there really isn't hardly any downside at all. The Vampire Coast. This is going to be a big old repeat from the Dark Elves, but honestly, here it's even stronger. Just like Black Arcs, legendary lords and admirals can use shipbuilding to take recruitment buildings around with them, allowing them to build armies no matter where they are on the map. They're also immortal, so you never have to worry about losing your investment. However, you can only recruit to their army directly, so others nearby will have to sell for trading units back and forth to fill themselves up. Just like the Dark Elves, this means any lands you settle on, you can just use for income to fuel your shipbuilding pirate lifestyle. Alternatively, you can raise everything you see to farm infamy, but I'd focus on cash first to give yourself a backup plan in case you lose your armies. Nothing more to it than that, recruitment on ships is damn strong, so use it and save money on recruitment buildings and settlements. The Vampire Counts. My Vampire Boys are one of the factions that I think needs rework the most, with their only new mechanic being from their race update years ago, that being the Bloodlines. That being said, there is more to this mechanic than it first appears, and I know there's one thing that I always tend to forget about. When you spend Blood Kisses on a Bloodline, not only do you gain bonuses from that tier, you also gain a Lord from that Bloodline to use in battle. These Lords are Immortal baseline and more often than not are far more powerful than their generic counterparts. Whenever you're building new armies, it is always worth making use of these lords rather than accidentally sinking a bunch of time and levels into someone generic. Not only can they never die, but they'll also come with enhanced and unique skills and powers to give them an edge in combat and campaign. The Warriors of Chaos. If there's one thing the Warriors of Chaos really love, it's constant battling and raising. Nothing does bring a family together like burning a settlement to the ground after slaughtering the entire populace, but when you're up in the Chaos Waste and NORSCA settlements, they will have these little symbols next to them. This shows which Norscan tribe has their homeland in that settlement, and when you occupy Dark Fortress with this symbol, you'll automatically vassalize the tribe, and any settlements you beat in battle which they don't already own can be gifted to them to expand your vassals' land and indirectly their tribute to you. Early on, your main objective should be to find as many Dark Fortresses with this symbol on it as possible, and take control of them to build up an army of vassals to prop up your economy and eventually join you in war. Now, not every fortress comes with its own vassal, so don't be confused if you take one and you don't automatically gain one. As long as you hunt down the right symbols, you should do just fine and make friends in no time. And finally, the Wood Elves. As a show of hands, who here remembers when the Wood Elves were the worst faction in the game, right next to the old Warriors of Chaos? These days, they're honestly one of the most overpowered for their especially particular playstyle. If you're not familiar, their goal is to traverse the world, capture, cleanse, and awaken magical forests to heal the Oak of Ages. This traversal is done via the deep roots, and the more the Oak is healed, the more often they can use this instantaneous map teleportation. Why am I giving you all this backstory? To let you know why you should only really worry about military in your Oak of Ages settlements. If you start as Durthu or Orion, you'll start out owning a settlement right next to the Oak, so can set to work building new military buildings to get better units right out the gate. You can then use the deep roots to teleport across the map to get more forests and get them cleansing. In these other forests, you can focus entirely on economy, since once it's awakened, you really don't have a reason to go back, so there's not much point being able to recruit endgame units from there. Once you have a couple of forests under your belt, this starts to result in an ungodly amount of coin coming in, allowing you to mass produce high tier armies from the nearby oak, and teleport them away instantly to take your forces wherever needed on the map. Even if armies take hits, once awakened, you'll probably want to head back to the oak for a brief rest anyway, before heading back out so you can top up your troops and get right back to it. I've had my richest campaign as the Wood Elves, and if you follow these instructions, you easily will too. And that's one tip for every single faction in campaign. Did I miss something you think should have made it in? Let me know down in the comments. Like, subscribe, and if you want to know which factions are the most annoying to fight, then check out this video to see the top 10.